In this video, we're going to talk about and introduce fiscal policy to you. Now, so far we've been talking about different ways to measure the economy, and today we'll actually begin looking at, once we know how to measure the economy, what do we do in response to various situations. And so today we're going to look at fiscal policy. Now, one of the most common analogies that we use for the economy is the analogy of a car. And so we'll kind of walk you through how this analogy applies, and I'm going to point out various things that we've talked about previously, like the business cycle and how the car analogy fits. One example is you can drive a car very fast, but it's not going to be a sustainable thing. So to make the analogy to the ADAS graph, you can have an inflationary gap, meaning you can overproduce or have extremely low unemployment, but that's not going to be sustainable long term. The other thing is, instead of driving too fast, you can drive your car extremely slow, right? And that would make the car last longer. That would be definitely more sustainable, but you could easily drive that car faster. So to make the analogy to the economy, you could make sure that the economy never overproduces, and in turn ensure that you have extremely high unemployment. The problem is you're not using those resources efficiently. You could easily make the car go faster. You could easily produce more without putting the car in danger. So driving 20 miles per hour is going to be too slow. And so when we talk about full employment, that's kind of the optimal level of production. So if you're driving on the interstate, 70 is kind of that optimal speed that the government has set, kind of the perfect speed for driving on the interstate. Now, when we talk about economies and start comparing different countries, obviously some cars have the capacity to drive faster than others. Industrialized nations versus third world nations. Countries like the United States or China, Great Britain, Germany can obviously produce at a much higher level than a country like Nigeria or Madagascar or Estonia in Eastern Europe. So they have got some differences there, just in the capability of different economies. And when we talk about things that can improve economies, things like technology or productivity, those are all things that can help the car go faster and longer, and make those higher speeds, those higher levels of productivity more sustainable. So looking to improve technology, increase productivity, are all things that we're looking for. Now, when we start to talk about the government's role, we begin to use this car analogy as the government's going to be the one who hits the brake gas pedal. How do we get back to that full employment or that long run line? So we would need to speed the car up or to slow it down. So that's what we're going to talk about with fiscal policy. So let's look at how the government can actually do this. What tools do they have to hit the brake or to hit the gas, so to say? Now, throughout the rest of this course, we're going to be looking at the two toolboxes that the government can use, the two types of policies that the government can enact. And so the first type is what we're looking at today, fiscal policy. These are going to be actions by Congress, and then signed into law by the President. So these are going to be actions taken by elected officials. Or we have monetary policy. These are policies enacted by the central bank. For the United States, it's the Federal Reserve. That's our central bank. And so we're looking at two different groups who have the tools, who can try to stabilize the economy one way or the other. Focus on fiscal policy. And we can see that the two tools that we have in our fiscal policy toolbox is government spending or taxes. Again, for fiscal policy, it's important to remember that these are policies that are enacted by elected officials. So later on in this unit, we're going to talk about some of the weaknesses with fiscal policy, and this is going to be a key component of it. So keep that in mind as we're talking about what Congress and the President can do, that there are political ramifications to their decisions as well. What we're going to look at now are the two different types of fiscal policy that exist. The first is what we call discretionary fiscal policy. These are any types of policies that have to be enacted by law each time they want to be used. Now this brings or introduces some potential problems that fiscal policy has, and again we'll look at those a little bit more closely later on in this unit. But one of the big problems is simply the lag time due to the bureaucracy. If Congress identifies a problem, there's in that long process that we talked about in government, where they have to go through the process of writing the bill, getting the bill to the floor, getting the bill passed, and even then it has to go through the other house and then eventually to the president. And so just the bureaucracy that's built into this process can cause issues as far as the speed of introducing these fiscal policies. So it takes time for Congress to act, and that's one of the key downfalls of fiscal policy. In a recession, just to give you an example, Congress wants to increase spending. So 2008, 2009, stimulus packages were introduced that would increase government spending. That's an example of discretionary fiscal policy. The other type is non-discretionary fiscal policy. Now these, when we are talking about what's better or worse, economists tend to prefer the non-discretionary fiscal policy because it does take some of the lag time out. These are policies that were passed through Congress, signed by the president, but have automatic triggers that will enact or deactivate the particular policy given certain conditions. We also call these automatic stabilizers. So you can see some of the examples that we have. A lot of programs like welfare, unemployment benefits, minimum wage are all tied to non-discretionary fiscal policy. And so the way that this works is when the economy goes into a recession or unemployment hits a certain rate, it will automatically increase the unemployment benefits because that's how the law was set up. They're not going to have to go in and pass a separate law to make those individual changes. The last thing we're going to look at is how does the government actually use these fiscal policies, the government spending and the taxes. And so we've said all along that when we have the inflationary and the recessionary gaps, we want to try to close those down. So let's look at the contractionary fiscal policy first. These are laws that are going to try to reduce inflation and decrease GDP. So that means we're trying to close an inflationary gap. For government spending, we would want to decrease government spending because that would reduce aggregate demand and shift aggregate demand back to the left, which would get us back to the long-run aggregate supply with an inflationary gap. The other thing we could do is increase taxes. That would reduce consumer spending, could also potentially reduce investment spending. Again, both things that would decrease aggregate demand, shifting that curve back towards our long-run aggregate supply. In reality, we often see a combination of the two. Small decreases in government spending, small tax increases, and that's how we would close an inflationary gap. For a recessionary gap, we need expansionary fiscal policy. And so what we look at in this case is laws that are trying to reduce unemployment and increase or boost GDP. So again, we're just going to do the opposite of what we saw with contractionary fiscal policy. We want to increase government spending. That would boost government spending for aggregate demand, shifting it to the right. Or we can decrease taxes. Again, most of the time it would be on consumers. We could also possibly see some corporate taxes that would alter investment spending. But again, like we saw with contractionary, often it comes in the form of combination of the two. And so what we're going to look at next time in class is how do we know how much should the government spend? How do we know the amount of the tax increase or the increase in government spending? So we'll look at that next time.